Awesome. Well, I wanted to ask first, how many people were here for at least one of the 3 talks before me? Okay, who's been all 3 before me? Kent's, Mike's, and Ryan's. Okay, great. It's funny that the schedule worked out this way because I also have been in here, all 3 talks, and all 3 of them kind of play into what I'm going to be talking about today. So it's actually perfect. I already had a great intro, so I'll be brief. But yeah, I work at Auth0 by Okta. I'm a transplanted Texan to Utah, working in JavaScript stuff since 2014. And I'm going to post my slides here to my Twitter account if you're interested in following me there and checking out the link to the slides there. I'm going to, like any good conference talk, I'm planning on fire hosing you with tons of code and documentation and examples, and then hopefully you keep up or take something home with you after this. I only have 20 minutes now, actually, or 21, so let's get going. I'm going to talk about what React Query is. The talk, obviously, is called Data Fetching with React Query. We're going to talk about how to fetch and cache server-side data, how to manage that on the front end, how to update server-side data, and how to do that through the front end as well. And then we'll kind of put it all together in a code sandbox, and then also look at some more advanced topics. All right, and within 5 seconds, literally, I Google searched this 2 days ago. I wanted to throw in a tweet from somebody, but React Query, the elevator pitch that you'll get is it helps remove a lot of lines of code from other state management libraries out there. So how many people use something like Redux in their apps today? Okay, cool. Some people use some Redux stuff. But React Query, very simply put and oversimplified, is a state management library for React applications. So it does something similar that Redux does, but it does it in a declarative way, which is good that Ryan talked about that before I'm talking. And it removes a lot of the boilerplate that goes on behind the scenes. Now, I'm sure that there's some backend developers in here, maybe some Java, C# people that roll in their head, yes, this is another state management library, another JavaScript framework to throw in your tool belt. That's just the way it works in JavaScript, and it's always good to have lots of tools to pull out at different times. So I talked about this a minute ago, but the way that I like to describe React Query, it's declarative. It is, and like we saw with Ryan's talk, it is some custom hooks, React hooks, that extract away and encapsulate all the boilerplate that goes into fetching data from an API, storing that on the front end, and for Kent's talk, caching that data, and allows you as a developer to focus on your business logic and less about storing and maintaining that server logic on your front end. So all the loops and all the stuff that you do to show users, React Query does all that for you. So there's 2 custom hooks from React Query that I'm going to talk about today. It's the use query hook there, and there's another one called use mutation. And we're going to break these down and look at some code examples. So one last slide on what is React Query before we get into that stuff. It's designed specifically for server state. So client state is more like a use state hook inside of your React component, and you're keeping track of where a user's clicking on the screen or where they're typing into input boxes. This is specifically for an API, something that you might not control. Maybe it's something you do control, but it could change from another user's browser in a different part of the world. This manages all that for you. And what comes in, what's nice about React Query is a lot of built-in features. So this is not a new thing. Shout out to Tanner Lindsley. He's actually a Utah native. He's not here today, unfortunately. I don't know if I want him in my talk anyways as I'm talking about this because I might say something wrong. But he's super nice. He's the founder of this library. He's not here today, but he is here in Utah, very, very hands-on in the UtahJS community. All this stuff kind of comes built into React Query. Things like render as you fetch, custom dev tools, prefetching. The window focus refetching is pretty cool. We're going to see that in the code sandbox. It works with suspense. If you use Next.js, it works with that as well. All right, so how do we learn new things? Before I just throw some React Query stuff at you, I like to think about how I like to learn new things. And when I went from Angular 1 to React back in the day, I remember as I was learning React, the entire time I was trying to think of, okay, so this is a component, but where's the controller part of this? How do I get stuff into a controller? like Angular does. And so I like to kind of translate it and show you a kind of step-by-step of how you might end up moving to React Query from a Redux, or if you're using your own custom code. So here's like an example of just a browser fetch. So we're getting some to-dos. Of course, you want to wrap it in a try catch to catch any errors. You've got to check the response, and everything's good. You got your .json on the promise there of to-dos, and then you have your data. And then in React, to make that work in a React component, you obviously need to bring in a use effect and a use state. You need to bring in some use state stuff like getting the data, making sure there's an error, updating if it's loading or not, so you can show an error message or a loading spinner. And then inside that try catch, inside of it is a use effect. And we've got to set data. We've got to set the loading spinner, set any errors, and again, another loading as well. All of this inside of your React component. You're using that use effect, which we've already talked about. Last couple talks have talked about use effects. And what was one of the negative things about use effect is each one of them have their own dependency array down there at the bottom, where maybe you wanted to fetch the Star Wars API at a different time, so you pass it a different dependency array, and so then your page starts to grow longer and longer because you got multiple different use effects. Inside of those are multiple different try catches, and then you need more use state hooks at the top to keep track of that data. Any good React developer might think, though, well, let's extract that out, like we saw from Ryan's talk, into a custom hook that we can use and kind of import around. And that's exactly what React Query is, and that's what it does for us. So one more example before we get to React Query is Redux stuff. So this is obviously the actions file. You've got to create a fetch to do action. It's going to have a whole bunch of dispatches, right? You need to fetch that stuff. You got to set the loading. You still have to define your request for to-dos. You got to set the success, the failure, the loading again, and this is just the actions file. In Redux, you got to create a reducer file where you've got your initial state. You've got your switch cases in there for loading states and failure states and your actually success states here. And then with Redux, once you get into your component, you still have a use effect, and you still need multiple use effects on that page. And so you might get into this multiple use effects inside your component, and that page can grow, and you still have to pass through, get a dispatch and selectors, and there's a time and place for all these things. But I'd like to show you another example of where React Query might come to your rescue. Again, this is another 5-second Google same search. I found this tweet where they kind of removed all those Redux files, actions, reducers, and stuff, and replaced it with React Query, and they deleted a bunch of code. So how does it work? So React Query is just custom hooks for us. So if you remember that first example, that with the use effects and the try catches, it extracts all that out into custom hooks. So it does use context inside of React. So you do need to wrap it in a provider component. And then you'll notice here that we're bringing in a use query hook down at the bottom. Now this is the custom React hook from use React Query, where it extracts, where you can deconstruct the data, the error, the is loading. This is done for us, and all we need to do is tell it the API we want it to hit. So we still create some type of way of fetching data. So you can use Axios, you can use fetch, but you still need some type of way of getting the data. Once you pass that function to the custom hook, it does all the stuff behind the scenes. The try catches, tells you if it's loading or not. If it fails, React Query automatically retry it a couple times before it throws an error. It'll refetch for you. And there's a lot of config options, which we're going to get into here, of what you can do with this custom hook. Like, for example, and one thing before I get into that, for Kent's talk, he talked about query keys. Again, I'm glad that I went after Kent, but he talked about how hard it is to cache data. And this specifically helps us cache data on our front end side of things by passing through a query key. And Kent did talk about this as well. But we give it a key so that it can cache that data for us, but we don't need to worry about those imperative details behind the scenes. We just say, all right, React Query, here's a key, keep my to-dos all together with this specific key, here's my API request, give me the data, tell me if it's loading, tell me if there's an error. We can give it a config flag here of refetch on an interval, refetch on a mount, refetch on a reconnect. You can give it a certain time frame or a number of tries to do it, and boom, it does it for us just by giving it a specific flag. We can give it initial data there. So any good application has a loading state or an empty state, and we can do that by passing through an initial data a param. We can deconstruct a refetch function, which basically calls our our query function that we're passing to it. But this is making sure that it stays that it when you call it manually that it keeps your cache up to date. And so you can manually refetch this. Maybe state doesn't change in your app, but you want to manually call a refetch. You can do that by using this refetch function. And then there's an on error where you can control the error experience. So let's say you want to throw a toast notification at the top, or you want to ping your company Slack account, or go to Bugsnag or something for error logging. You can do that by passing in a function here on the on error. And then this one is pretty popular too. There's an enabled flag. Let's say you wanted to filter out those to-dos, but you don't want to actually call any to-dos until you know that you have a filter option. You can give it a double bang filter. Is there an option there, true or false? Okay, if there is one there, then go ahead and make that Axios or that fetch call. And I just touched on, 3 or 4, but there's like 15 of them. Of all the stuff on the left side that we can deconstruct from calling a request so that it covers most of the edge cases that your app might come in. And on the right side, config options that we can pass to the getting of that data. There's, again, another 15-ish things that you can do that I haven't even talked about. So that's how we get the data, how we fetch and get data. How do we make changes to server-side data using another custom hook from React Query called useMutation? So very similar to useQuery, useMutation. You give it a fetch call of some kind. And then in this example specifically, I have an onSuccess where I'm invalidating that cache. So again, Kent's talked really stressed about how hard it is to keep that cache up to date. And this does this for us. All we need to say in a declarative way is revalidate that cache that for this key, go and get the new stuff and give me that data. And then just similar to useQuery, there's an on error here, there's an on success, there's an on settle. You can customize that experience of what it looks like when you make that server-side data. You can customize what that experience will look like. All right, let's put it all together. So I've got a code sandbox here where you can see the useQuery and you can see the useMutation. If you try to pull this up on your phone, it's code sandbox, so it might not be the best experience, but maybe you can paste it over to your computer after this. All right, cool. So, sweet, we got people coming in, awesome. Okay, so this is a quick and dirty little example. On the right side, here's our little basic information. We've got a to-do list here that we can add stuff in. When I push enter, obviously it's adding that to-do. You can push clear, and that clears all the data. Down here's the dev tools that I talked about. This is a custom dev tools that you can bring into. Similar to Redux, how it has a dev tools, you can see and watch the data that as it changes. You can manually control refetches of that data. You can break down what data is in here and when it's happening and how long it is, how much there is, all that stuff. But so looking at the code kind of all together, again, this is one page, Redux. It's not actions, reducers, creators, selectors, all that stuff. We need to wrap it all, wrap our whole entire app with a provider so that we can get context from our custom hooks. We do have one use state here, and that's just to keep track of the value that gets typed into the input box here. And then we have this use query. So this is how we get that data. We're passing through a cache key, right? This is the query key of to-dos. We're doing an async Axios get to get that data, and then we return it. And then this destructured values here is telling us the data, if there's kind of errors or status, which we can add our custom JSX here. We can say there's a loading state, there's an error state, and all that stuff's right here for us. There's two sets of mutations happening here, right? There's a post where we created a to-do. There's another mutation of clearing. So we've got two separate types of mutations, an add and a clear, both using that custom hook of using mutation. both of these, we are passing some type of API request to both of these, one of them adding something and one of just clearing everything. And then in both cases on the onSuccess, we are invalidating that query cache and having it refetch and get that updated data. HTML is pretty straightforward. We've got a form component with an onSubmit. And inside the onSubmit is where we actually call the mutation query, where we're saying, here's the value that gets passed to that custom hook. Go out and mutate the data either by posting, adding a new one, or clearing. So we have the input here that keeps track of that value. It gets typed in here. And then the button clear calls the clear mutation.mutate to go and mutate that data. So very simple. We talked, if you were here for Ryan's, he talked about getting rid of the use effects, right? There's no use effects in here. All that's extracted away, it's encapsulated, it's probably built better than you could even do it unless you spent a lot of time, because this is kind of bulletproof at this point. But all that use effects are pulled out. You don't have to worry about dependencies arrays. You say, here's my API, give me the data and all the stuff that I need. Here are two options when I need to mutate that data. Here's that request. And it just does everything behind the scenes. It handles that use effects for us. It's declarative. It makes it easier for us. All right, in the last 5 minutes, I wanted to talk about some more advanced implementations, maybe for those that use React Query currently and want to see what else it can do that maybe you're not using today with it. This is one that I thought was pretty cool. So this is if you have a progressive web app or if you wanted to handle offline requests, so you can use React Query to write to local storage. And then you can, inside of the provider option of this, and we'll go through all this in in the last couple of minutes, but basically you're saying, keep track of all that data that's happening, store it in local storage, and then if you do come back online, then go ahead and resume regular mutations to the API that's passed to it. Another option is pagination. So everybody has probably worked with an API that probably needs to be paginated of some kind. And so there's an easy flag there called keep previous data of true. And this is going to concatenate that data on top of each other. Instead of replacing, when you invalidate that query key, that cache key, this is just going to concatenate for us. And for those Next.js users, so one thing that's always complicated for React developers when they come into it is learning about server-side components and learning how to get data and write that on a server-side component. So like Next.js, there is support for hydration and dehydration of data using React Query. As you can see, this get static props here, that's something from Next.js, and that it's completely supported by React Query. And I didn't say, but it's obviously TypeScript supported as well. And it even is suspense supported as well. So those that might be talk their bosses into other team in it is using suspense. You can use React Query with suspense as well. So you can reset error boundaries with React Query and kind of work together in that case. And then one other thing that I have here is there's sometimes when you want to run parallel requests, or, and side note, if you wanted to cancel requests, React Query does have a way of canceling a call that's already happened from your front end. So let's say you make a request, but the user does something and you want to cancel that request in flight. You can do that with React Query, which is really cool. But in this case here, you can run parallel queries together. So if you have multiple things, there's a use queries, plural, custom hook. This is a third one I'm introducing that you can run, that can be provided to you. It can run those parallel queries together. And then any good developer should probably think about testing this stuff. And whenever you use declarative third-party packages, there's always kind of a nightmare around testing those because you don't have control of that necessarily. But React Query, thankfully enough, does have great documentation on how to write tests and how to test React Query custom hooks inside of it. So in this example, you can see we have a use query hook on that custom hook line here. We do wrap a child. Hello? Okay. We can wrap that provider around the children, and then you can render that and write a expect the current data to equal hello. So it is test friendly, so those that are in QA and want to test this shouldn't be a showstopper. You can definitely do that yourself. One last thing I'll say outside of this recap here is that React Query, even though it says React Query, it's actually been renamed to, I think, TanStack Query because of Tanner, who's the founder of it. And it's more because React is not the only framework framework that's supported by React Query. You can actually use it in Angular. There's support in Svelte and Vue and a bunch of other languages. So this idea of encapsulating fetch requests and getting data and keeping that cache inside of your client, you can use this type of stuff in other frameworks outside of React. But I talked mainly about 2 custom hooks. I use query and I use mutation. Basically gets all the stuff for us. It's declarative. It pulls it all away, encapsulates it, and then it manages that cache for you. And there's a lot of other custom hooks, flags, options, testing, tons of other support. So definitely go and check that all out. Lots of documentation's great up on tanstack.com/query. So definitely check that out. And there's tons of YouTube videos, Dev2 stuff that you can go to learn more. And that's all. Thanks.